10 hours ago, I put a video out for The Last Dagger. And in this video, I compared it to Tamer, which apparently a fair few people are quite upset about, which personally I find hilarious. I even received a few spicy DMs, but no one actually wants to address the issue at hand. They all just want to call me a fucking idiot. So I'm going to address the issue for you. And the issue is quite simply, your meta is wrong. Very, very wrong. Very wrong. Now, in that video, I took someone else's Tamer build. I don't have a Tamer. I don't want a Tamer. It's, in my opinion, for whatever that opinion may be worth, it is a bad weapon. I could stretch to saying it's mediocre at best. And the reason for this is every spreadsheet warrior on the internet for the first Descendant right now is calculating all of these weapons with the least amount of effort. Something like the Last Dagger, if you only just crafted it with its unique ability at 0, yeah, it's a bad weapon. However, that's not its full form, essentially. You gotta think of ultimate weapons as like anime characters. You haven't seen my final form. You have to get them to unique level 4 and then readjust your calculations. Once you do this, you should find, at least from what I have tested so far, the ultimate weapons are winning across the board. A lot of them are circumstantial. Depending on the circumstance, they can win. I went over this in my Last Dagger video in terms of dungeons, ad clearing, operations, infiltrations, etc, etc. Essentially just generalized ad clear, farming. The Last Dagger, from what I have tested so far, actually beats out most other options because of its stacking mechanic. And it beats them very easily. We're then able to bolster this even further by putting it on Valby. So I have two selections going on. I basically have weapon without Valby and then again weapon with Valby. So I'm trying to keep it fair across the board. Again, this is going to be Last Dagger versus Tamer, just to highlight my point. So I've done Tamer without Valby and then Tamer with Valby, with the build that I showed in that video. If I've got a screenshot of it still, I will put that on screen around now. I'm hoping it was there. We'll find out in post-editing, won't we? So the point is, under what circumstance does X weapon win? Because this is what a meta is. In recent years, meta has become most effective tactics available, META, meta. But if we're using tactics, that means the scenario, the circumstance in which that weapon is performing has changed. And if that scenario has changed, is there a better option? For some weird reason in this game, everyone is just turning around and going, Tamer, Tamer, Tamer. Want to do a Colossus fight? Tamer. Want to do some infiltrations? Tamer. Want to do a defense mission? Tamer. Void interception? Tamer. The Void experiment operation? Tamer. Kuiper mine unblocking? Tamer. There is effectively only one of those that a Tamer would outperform a Last Dagger in, and that is Colossus fights. Theoretically as well, and that's simply just because Last Dagger is going to be relying on killing ads for stacks, whereas Tamer doesn't need to. With Tamer, you just fire. The situation has changed. So out of, what did I name there, 9 scenarios, Tamer beats Last Dagger in 1, and you want to call Tamer meta. Good for you. Good for you. Right, so now we've got the slightly agitated intro out of the way, 4 minutes in, Jesus. Right, from that build, these are the stats. Okay, we got the rounds per second, the firearm attack after multiplier, the round RPM after multiplier with rounds per second, like I said, weak point after multiplier, critical hit chance after multiplier. With Valby, this goes to 0.3, which is taken into account, as you can see here, hopefully. So 0.3, so we've got 0.1 here, with Valby it's 0.3. Critical hit damage, the reload time, the rounds in the mag, and then I took the base damage with the multiplier that he had with the stacks that we would gain per second with mental focus for the first second, because I kind of felt that's a bit more accurate. And then we calculated it at max for mental focus. Now, when it comes to the actual calculation, you might notice that with Tamer, with mental focus full, they're in red. The reason being, that's what this 0.8 is for, the moment we hit max stacks, which on a Tamer isn't 150, it's 149, so we're not even getting full buff. But still, my point here isn't that, it's more the moment we hit that maximum stack, we're only calculating then essentially a time frame of 0.08 seconds. It's actually less than that. I've just rounded it up. It's 0.0768. So theoretically, unless you're running Glay, this is impossible to hit. This is outright impossible unless you're running Glay. And of course, down on this one where we're running Valby, which is highlighted in red, it's not like we can have Valby and Glay in play simultaneously. Like, it's just not happening. That's why it's highlighted in red. This is theoretically impossible. This is the max it could potentially get with some form of hack, but it's theoretically impossible to actually get. Well, this one isn't. This one is, because we're running Valby. We've got all of the stats here in a lovely little sheet. You can see this one is Tamer. The first 4 are Tamer. And all we've done is calculate burst DPS, which is essentially attack times rounds per second, which gives us our base value DPS. So that's our damage with no crits, no weak points. We then multiply it by our critical multiplier to get our critical hit DPS. We then multiply our base DPS by our weak point to get our weak point DPS. We then multiply our base by our critical multiplier with our weak point multiplier to get our critical weak point multiplier. We then do the same again on Valby. Hopefully we can see here, like 3.1, 2.9. Like again, with the weak point, both weak point DPS and critical weak point, we're assuming 100% uptime on hitting a weak point. Every single bullet hits the weak point. We then do the same again on sustained DPS, which is what the game calculates. That number next to your weapon, that is sustained DPS. The equation is mag times damage divided by reload plus mag divided by rounds per second, which is what this equation here is. You can see it, hopefully it's a bit longer, opposed to the equation up here, which is a lot more simple. We then do the same thing. So we've equated our base sustained DPS. I'm now messing things up. Times our critical hit damage multiplier, our weak point multiplier, and then our crit and our weak point multiplier. And then we do it again with Valby. I've then done it again for Last Dagger. Now, annoyingly, it's a bit bigger with Last Dagger, simply because I've calculated it at base with no stacks, and then with 1 stack, 2 stack, 3 stack, and then 4 stack. I've not calculated the 5th stack because it only lasts for 1 shot. I've also not calculated in the fact that I'm running Firing Fiesta as well for sustained DPS, which is down here. Now comes the fun part of comparing them. Now, there's no real direct way to directly compare them, simply because one's running mental focus, which means it's going to be constantly ramping up, and the other one, every time we get a kill, we get a stack. So I've tried to average these, which is what the green things are mostly all about. So, if we look at Tamer, and the main things we ought to be looking at here is actually the critical DPS and the critical weak point DPS. Because simply, it's not like if we're running this weapon, we're not going to be getting crits, which would be here. And then obviously the main point of Last Dagger is to get crits, as well as then with weak points. So we're going to be looking at mostly critical DPS and critical weak point DPS. So without Valby, Tamer typically is getting, we'll say 700k, right? 700k. On Last Dagger, I have found that I spend the vast majority of my time between 2 and 3 stacks. Okay, so we've got to beat 700k in burst DPS with Last Dagger. Done. 1 million, 1.2 million. Even at 1 stack, we're at 800k. Cool. Critical weak point, 1.9. Again, this is assuming that we are hitting weak point with every single bullet. Last Dagger, 2 and 3 stacks, 3.1 and 3.8. Cool. Even at 1 stack, we're at 2.6. In terms of burst DPS, I can't even say Last Dagger shits on Tamer, because that would be underselling the Last Dagger. We'll do it again with Valby. We're looking at 1.1 mil and 3.1 mil with Tamer. Last Dagger with Valby, 1.3 at 1 stack, 1.5 with 2 stacks, 1.7 with 3 stacks. 3.1 mil on Tamers to beat. Well, 1 stack we got 4.1, 4.7 and 5.4. Again, like this is burst DPS, admittedly. Tamer, it's an LMG. In most games like this, LMGs are not known for their burst DPS. They're known for their sustain. Cool, let's have a look at sustain, shall we? So with sustained, Tamer, without Valby, we're looking at like 540,000. Okay, Last Dagger with sustained at 1 stack, we're at 400. 2 stacks, we're at 485. With 3 stacks, we're at 584. And 4 stacks, we are at 684. It's scaling, but generally across the board, without Valby, it's kind of even, realistically. There's like minimal difference between them, which I also did show on the calculations I put in a previous video. There's like maybe, like on average, Last Dagger is beating it by about 6%. That's realistically it. The next point would be weak point on critical weak point on sustained DPS. So we've got to beat 1.4 mil. So we're going to come down here. 1 stack is 1.2. 2 stack is 1.5. 3 stack is 1.8. 4 stack is 2. Like in weak point, Last Dagger is decimating Tamer. Like Tamer doesn't even enter the conversation at this point. It's kind of silly. We're now going to look at Valby. So Tamer with Valby, we got 885,000 and 2.4 mil, roughly. Again, without weak point, we're looking mostly around trying to get 3 to 4 stacks. But this is still going to be relatively easy to get. Again, it's a scale. It's close enough to a point of where it becomes a non-issue. And then if we look at Valby with Tamer, it's 2.4 mil. 2 stacks basically gets us even. 3 stacks wins. 4 stacks is just ridiculous. Right, so in closing, and my point quite simply here is, on average across the board, Last Dagger is doing about 28% more than what Tamer is even capable of at the top end, assuming some form of magical fucking hack. Why, dear fellow spreadsheet warriors, are we saying Tamer is meta? Because if it was, there'd be no way in hell I could outperform it with the gun that everyone seems to think is terrible. Because that terrible gun is outperforming your meta. Which kind of makes me think, 1, you don't know what meta is. 2, you don't know how to be a spreadsheet warrior. And I mean this like quite sincerely, because I'm now really confused. I like a good debate. I like a good spreadsheet fight. This isn't... I feel like I'm picking on the slow fat kid in class. To give an example of this, right? I've seen people claim that Real Life Fighter is a 100% bonus to your firearm attack. All of the time. If you don't know what Real Life Fighter is, at max stack, it's like negative 20% accuracy. But for every time you hit a weak point, you get plus 10 firearm attack up to 10 stacks. And I think it lasts for like 5 seconds. Could be wrong. But every time you miss a weak point, you lose 2 stacks. This is a 100% bonus. I mean, at max, assuming you have 100% accuracy, yeah, it would be. But no one's calculating uptime. From the testing that I've done, I want to get it on general rounds. I don't have it on general rounds yet. But from the calculating that I've done and the testing that I've done, it's maybe 50% firearm attack. Because the moment, like, even if you get it to 50%, if you miss a shot, it goes down to 30. If you miss another shot, it goes down to 10. Now imagine this on a weapon that's rapid fire, like, I don't know, Thunder Cage, an SMG that has not the greatest accuracy anyway. You're then giving it a debuff of negative 20, and you really think this is a 100% increase to your firearm attack. Mate, stop looking at spreadsheets and go play the fucking game, because it isn't. And we're calm. We're calm. That should cover basically every single point that the 19 of you that DM'd me over my previous video. Taking into account averages, taking into account uptime, I've gone through several points. I'm completely ignoring the rather interesting words that you called me. I'm going to try and be the bigger person and just do it this way, because I do believe that at this point I have disproved every single claim they have made. Yeah, the meta is wrong, or at least the YouTube meta is wrong. For everyone else, just keep testing. Just keep testing. You'll be surprised what is actually in this game. I'm finding things on the regular that are actually kind of insane. One of the weapons that I'm really looking forward to testing is the final masterpiece. It is looking like, in terms of burst DPS, in sustained DPS it's horrible from what I've tested so far, but in burst DPS it's probably going to be the highest burst DPS weapon in the game, which means in terms of ad clear it should be up there with Thunder Cage, which is going to be hilarious. And this is another weapon that people are shitting on. It's just like, really? Did you test it? Did you actually test it? Anyway, like I said, that should cover everything. The meta is wrong, and I find it hilarious. Have fun. Good luck. Don't die. It's bad for the health.